The country that wrote the rules on human rights has a prison that broke them. If you're into stories that flip everything you thought you knew, subscribe. This channel does exactly that. Switzerland has the highest average wealth per adult on the planet. More than $700,000 per person. It is home to the United Nations, the International Red Cross, and the world's most respected humanitarian frameworks. When people imagine a Swiss prison, they picture something clean, humane, progressive, because everything else about Switzerland is, they are wrong. What actually exists inside Switzerland's prison system ranges from a radical open farm with no walls to a pre-trial jail so overcrowded that Switzerland's own Supreme Court ruled it a constitutional violation. We are ranking 3 of its most significant prisons from worst to best, not by size, not by fame, but by what they reveal about the gap between a country's values and its reality. We start at the bottom. Geneva sits on the southern tip of Lake Geneva, flanked by the Alps and the Jura Mountains, home to over 40 international organizations including the World Health Organization and the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. It is one of the most diplomatically significant cities on Earth, and about 12 kilometers from its city center, just inside the Swiss border with France, sits a prison that the Council of Europe's Anti-Torture Committee has criticized repeatedly. That Switzerland's Federal Supreme Court has ruled a human rights violation, and that has been described by its own Oversight Commission as a powder keg. This is Champ-Dollon. The prison opened in 1977 for a straightforward purpose: short-term pre-trial detention. People awaiting trial, not yet convicted of anything, held temporarily until the courts processed their cases. The building was designed for 270 detainees. That number is important, because almost everything that defines Champ-Dollon today comes back to what happens when a facility built for 270 people is forced to hold 2, sometimes 3 times that many. By the early 2000s, overcrowding had become chronic. The causes were structural: rising immigration, longer pre-trial periods, a shortage of prison space across the French-speaking cantons, and other Swiss penitentiaries refusing to accept transfers due to their own capacity problems. Champ-Dollon absorbed the overflow. It kept absorbing it, year after year, with no meaningful infrastructure to match the numbers. In 2006, the occupancy rate hit 200%. Double capacity. That year, a full-scale mutiny broke out inside the prison. Inmates rioted. The incident made national headlines and triggered formal inquiries, but the population kept climbing. By 2010, a record 622 people were locked inside a building designed for 270. Over the full year, a total of 3,075 individual inmates cycled through its doors. On a single day in July, 622 people were behind its walls simultaneously. A 2012 visit by Switzerland's National Commission for the Prevention of Torture recorded 671 inmates. By the time their report was published, the number had passed 750. Cells designed for 1 person held 3. The kitchen, built to feed 270, was described as antiquated and inadequate. There was a single telephone for hundreds of inmates. Seeing a doctor or social worker could take days or weeks. Inmates spent 23 hours a day locked in their cells, not as a disciplinary measure, but because there was no physical space or staffing capacity to let them out. The population itself adds another layer of complexity. In 2010, 115 different nationalities were represented inside Champ-Dollon. Swiss nationals made up just 7.2% of the total. 1 in 10 inmates spent a single night before being processed or released. The 36% who stayed 8 nights or longer did so under conditions a Geneva Parliamentary Commission publicly described as explosive. In 2008, the Council of Europe's Committee for the Prevention of Torture formally criticized the overcrowding. The report didn't generate sufficient change. In 2014, brawls involving 100 prisoners broke out during exercise time. 26 inmates and 8 staff were injured across 3 days of fighting, several hospitalized. The prison director described the situation as requiring civilized coexistence in a facility where 3 strangers shared a cell built for 1, speaking different languages, waiting for trials they had not yet had. A 2010 study found that almost half the inmates at Champ-Dollon were suffering from psychological problems. The medical unit had nurses present around the clock, but psychiatric care at scale in a remand prison operating at 200% capacity is not a safety net, it is a pressure valve on a structure already past its limit. In May 2018, Switzerland's Federal Supreme Court ruled directly on the conditions. A prisoner had been held in a small cell for 234 days between 2014 and 2016, permitted to leave for 1 hour of walking per day and 3 to 4 hours of exercise per week. The court found this violated the constitutional prohibition on torture and the European Convention on Human Rights. This was not an external body criticizing Switzerland. This was Switzerland's own highest court ruling that Switzerland's own prison had crossed a line that Swiss law explicitly prohibits. By 2019, the occupancy rate had dropped to 160%. Still more than half again over capacity, still a pre-trial detention facility. Still holding people who, in the eyes of Swiss law, had not yet been found guilty of anything. That is the detail that defines Champ-Dollon more than any other. This is not a maximum security penitentiary holding the country's most dangerous convicted criminals, it is a remand prison. The majority of people inside it at any given moment are legally innocent, awaiting a trial that has not happened, in conditions that the country's own legal system has ruled are unconstitutional. Geneva is the city where the Geneva Conventions were written, the document that gave the world its framework for the humane treatment of people in captivity. And sitting on its outskirts is a jail where unconvicted detainees spend 23 hours a day locked 3 to a cell meant for 1. That tension between what Switzerland represents internationally and what Champ-Dollon has been allowed to become is not a footnote. It is the point, and if that contradiction bothers you as much as it should, you lines want to stick around. Because the next 2 prisons make this one look like the beginning of a much stranger story. Subscribe so you don't miss them. From Geneva's most overcrowded jail we moved 100 kilometers north into the canton of Bern to a baroque castle that became something no one expected it to be, the only place in Switzerland where every sentenced woman in the country eventually ends up. Hindelbank began as a poorhouse. In 1866, the canton of Bern purchased a 17th century castle from the aristocratic von Erlock family and turned it into a charitable institution for women. 30 years later, in 1896, it became a forced labor institution. By 1912, it had been converted into a full detention facility for female inmates. The women lived and worked inside the castle and its outbuildings for decades, until no purpose-built facilities were constructed on the same site in 1961. The castle itself was repurposed as an administrative building, the bones of an aristocratic summer residence, now housing the offices of a national penitentiary. That word, national, is what makes Hindelbank different from almost every other prison in this video. It is the only facility in Switzerland exclusively dedicated to housing female inmates. Every woman sentenced to imprisonment in the country passes through this single address. Women from French-speaking cantons, Italian-speaking cantons, German-speaking cantons, all sent to a German-speaking institution in the canton of Bern in 2017. 14 inmates inside Hindelbank were from French-speaking Switzerland. They were serving time in a language that wasn't theirs, cut off from family visiting distances that worked for inmates from nearby cantons in a facility that wasn't built with any of this in mind. By 2020, the prison's maximum capacity stood at 107 places. That number tells you everything about the pressure on the system. Women make up roughly 6% of Switzerland's total prison population. With such a small group spread across 26 cantons, most cantons have never built a dedicated women's facility. It simply isn't economically viable. Some house women in separate sections of men's prisons. Others have closed their women's facilities entirely, as happened with the Ryant Park facility in Geneva. The result is that Hindelbank carries a weight disproportionate to its size. Its occupancy rate sits consistently at 100%, and a waiting list runs in parallel. In 2017, 20 women were waiting for a place in a facility that holds just over 100. The consequences of running at permanent full capacity inside a facility not originally designed for incarceration are not abstract. Switzerland's National Commission for the Prevention of Torture has noted that all admissions to the security cell at Hindelbank in 2019 were related to acute self-harm. The Commission flagged that women with acute psychiatric needs were being managed through disciplinary infrastructure rather than therapeutic transfer, a cell with a lock, not a ward with a clinician. Hindelbank does operate a dedicated therapeutic measures unit, opened in 2011, but the demand consistently exceeds what a 107-place facility can absorb. There is a darker chapter inside Hindelbank's history that the Swiss government has formally acknowledged. Between 1940 and 1981, young people, many of them girls aged 14 to 18, were sent to Hindelbank without a trial, without a conviction, and without a meaningful right of appeal. The legal mechanism was called administrative detention, and the reasons recorded in their files included depraved lifestyle, licentiousness, alcoholism, and in multiple cases, simply becoming pregnant outside of marriage. One woman, Ursula Molibiondi, was 17 when she fell pregnant by a divorced man she wanted to marry. Because unmarried couples couldn't legally live together, the couple fled to Italy. They were found. She was handcuffed, 5 months pregnant, and escorted to Hindelbank for 2 years of what the authorities called re-education. Her parents were billed for it. In 2010, Swiss Justice Minister Evelyn Widmer-Schlumpf issued a formal apology at a commemorative event held at the prison itself. She told former victims that lawmakers had to ensure it could never happen again. The prison where the apology was delivered is still operating today, still the only dedicated women's facility in the country, still running at capacity, still managing demand it was never designed to carry. In 1994, Hindelbank became the first prison in the world to install a syringe dispenser for inmates. At the height of Switzerland's HIV crisis, authorities made the calculation that preventing needle sharing was more important than the optics of a prison appearing to facilitate drug use. It was a world first, and it was controversial. It was also effective. That combination, pragmatic, evidence-based, occasionally ahead of its time, while simultaneously struggling under structural pressures it cannot resolve, is as accurate a portrait of Hindelbank as any. Now for the one that surprises everyone. Saxerriet sits in the Rhine Valley near Sennwald in the canton of St. Gallen, less than 2 kilometers from the border with Liechtenstein. It was built between 1960 and 1964 across 3 pavilions. There are no walls, there are no armed guards. Inmates wear their own clothes. They wake up, go to work, and return, not because the perimeter forces them to, but because the system asks them to choose to. This is Switzerland's only fully open prison. The facility holds 118 male inmates. Sentences range from drunk driving to murder. The classification that determines whether someone ends up at Saxerriet is not the crime they committed, but an assessment of whether they can be trusted to function within an open system. Of the 90 staff positions authorized, the facility typically operates with around 46 full-time and 35 part-time employees. Just 15 of those are in security roles. The rest are social workers, instructors, and specialist supervisors, people whose job is not to contain inmates, but to develop them. The work program is structured around the divisions: industrial and agricultural. Inmates train in metalwork, printing, mechanics, carpentry, and computer-aided design. The facility operates as a functioning business, competing for commercial contracts based on quality of output. Inmates earn wages tied to productivity. In the months before release, they work outside the prison entirely, commuting to jobs in the surrounding community and returning to sleep. The transition to freedom is gradual, deliberately so. By the time someone leaves Saxerriet, they have already been practicing freedom while the safety net still exists. The theoretical foundation behind Saxerriet is documented in academic research. Studies of the prison have described its model as corrections based on trust, built on the idea that criminality is not a fixed quality in a person, but a product of external conditions and social labeling. The logic follows that if you treat someone as a responsible adult capable of making good decisions and build structures that require them to do exactly that, you reduce the likelihood they will return to crime. Trust becomes the primary therapeutic instrument. The data supports it. Countries that rely heavily on open prisons show an adult recidivism rate of around 38% against roughly 50% in countries with highly restrictive closed systems. Switzerland's overall adult recidivism rate, as recorded by the Federal Statistical Office, sat at around 23% as of 2020, one of the lowest in Europe. Saxerriet's open model is a significant part of how that number stays low. The obvious question is whether inmates simply walk away. Some do. Switzerland actually leads Europe in the rate of escapes from open prisons. In 2012, 250 prisoners left without permission, and in 2017 the figure was 170. But the research on this is less alarming than the headline suggests. Most who leave do so temporarily, often due to a crisis rather than a calculated decision to abscond. The serious escapes, the premeditated breakouts from closed prisons, are declining. In 2010, 24 prisoners broke out of closed Swiss facilities. By recent years, that number had dropped to 6. What Saxerriet represents is a bet that the traditional prison model, walls, locks, uniforms, total control, produces worse outcomes than the alternative. That giving someone a job, a wage, responsibility, and the requirement to return each night by choice is more likely to produce a person who functions in society than locking them in a cell and releasing them with no preparation into a world that has moved on without them. The bet has decades of data behind it. And it is operating in the Rhine Valley, 118 inmates at a time, with no wall in sight, 3 prisons. One is a constitutional violation in the shadow of the UN, one is a 128-year-old castle carrying an entire country's female prison population on a waiting list. And one is an open farm where murder convicts go to work, earn wages, and walk back through an unlocked door every night, and rarely come back once they leave for the last time. Switzerland didn't build a prison system. It built 3 different answers to the same question, and only one of them is actually working. If this kind of story is what you come here for, subscribe, there's more where this came from. Here is what stays with you after looking at all 3. Champ-Dollon costs Geneva more per inmate per day than a 5-star hotel room. Saxerriet costs significantly less, produces trained workers, generates commercial revenue, and sends people home less likely to come back. The expensive one is the failure, the cheap one is the model. And yet Champ-Dollon has been overcrowded for 30 years while Saxerriet remains a single facility with 118 beds that most people outside Switzerland have never heard of. Hindelbank sits between them, not a failure, not a model, but a mirror. A 128-year-old institution carrying the full weight of a country as female incarceration because no one ever built a second one. A place that gave the world its first prison syringe dispenser and also locked up teenage girls for getting pregnant. Both things are true, both things are Hindelbank. What Switzerland shows is that a wealthy, stable, well-governed country can simultaneously produce one of the most humane prison experiments on earth and one of the most overcrowded pre-trial jails in Western Europe, and let both exist side by side for decades without resolving the contradiction. The question worth sitting with is not what Switzerland is doing wrong. It is why the thing that is clearly working stays small, while the thing that is clearly failing stays open. That question does not have a comfortable answer. But it is the right one to ask. If you made it this far, subscribe. Every video on this channel starts with a question most people aren't asking and ends somewhere they didn't expect. That's the only thing we do here.